The body farm, it was set up in about 1980 by an American forensic anthropologist called Dr. William Bass, who realised that there was a gap in knowledge, and the whole drive behind the place is essentially to research decomposition, to observe each particular stage, what happens in different environmental conditions, different temperatures, so that when police discover a body, they have all this information which they can then use to find out how old the victim was, gender, whether it's male, female, what injuries it sustained, and also, you know, how long ago the individual died. And I was actually going over to write about American police officers who were receiving some very intensive and highly realistic crime scene training, forensic training, which involved exhuming graves where real human bodies had been buried 6 months before, specifically for this exercise. And the idea was that the police officers had to treat it exactly as they would a real crime scene. It was supposed to be a serial killer, and these were the victims of a serial killer. So it was all quite even though it was a mock-up, it was done as authentically as possible. On the last day, one of the forensic anthropologists came over to me with quite an evil glint in his eye, and told me to put down the tape recorder. Gave me a pair of white overalls, rubber gloves, boots, a trowel and a little brush, and told me to help the police officers exhume the grave. Which wasn't exactly what I'd had in mind, because I was more than happy just to watch other people doing this. And it was in Tennessee in July, which was very hot, very humid, so it was quite an odd experience. Our rotting body smells. It's not pleasant. I think David Hunter describes it in The Chemistry of Death as something along the lines of an overripe cheese that's been left out too long in the sun. And I think that probably, from my limited experience, that pretty much summed up what it was like in Tennessee anyway. I think possibly the one that struck me most strongly was learning how they take fingerprints sometimes, which is that's quite often if a body has been dead for quite some time, the skin will slough off and it becomes possible. The limb is a very, very grim business, and you know, so I do apologise to anybody who's a squeamish disposition who might be listening to this. But basically, the skin is shed off the hands, and it then dries out. But it's possible to rehydrate that by soaking it in water, in which case then someone can literally slip the skin on like a pair of gloves, and the fingerprints can be lifted, which again sounds very, very grisly, but it's an essential tool for identifying a body that's been found. DNA testing can take months, and it's not always possible anyway. I'm a great believer in talking to experts. Essentially, I'm a journalist, I'm a layman. I'm not a forensic anthropologist myself or anything like that. I'm not a police officer. To give the books that air of authenticity, it's quite important to me to talk to people who can actually advise me on aspects like that. So that's what I do basically. I've got quite a few contacts now in forensic departments, and quite a few police officers who are all very, very helpful. And sometimes it's a matter of a phone call. Occasionally you meet them face to face, and more often it just comes down to sending emails backwards and forwards, and hoping that the idea you've got in mind is feasible, and that it can be worked out with existing science, which is quite important to me. The only thing I do tend to be careful of, if anybody tells me something shouldn't be used, that it's not right to put into the public eye, then I do hold that back. One police officer I spoke to said, you've got to be careful because you don't want criminals reading this as a guidebook. I think you've got to be quite responsible with it as well. But once people realise that they can trust you, that they're not going to tell you something in confidence and then you abuse that, then you do get quite a good relationship going, and I think I'd call the police. No, I've picked up quite a bit of information and background knowledge through the course of writing the books, but I'm no expert. I don't think I wouldn't want to be a forensic anthropologist myself, so I'm quite happy to leave that side of things to the experts, and I'll just write about it. I suppose the bottom line is I write the sort of books I enjoy reading myself. And when I read a thriller, I want to be thrilled, I want to be frightened, I want to feel that I can't read quickly enough because I've got to find out what's happening next. So when I'm writing the books, I just try and put myself in that situation and think what would really frighten me if I was reading this. So I suppose I come at them from the angle of being a reader myself. And yes, sometimes there are situations and you think, oh, that is really quite creepy or frightening or whatever, and you just hope that people will feel the same way about it. And you just have to keep your fingers crossed that it works. I don't like talking too much about work in progress, but I've started the next David Hunter novel now. He will be back in the UK, and this time around we will learn a little bit more about his past.